Story 1. A week ago, I had to tell my best friend of 20 years to choose between me and her physically and mentally abusive partner. He is in jail, she is facing felony charges because of him, and her children are in foster care because of him. Yet, she still chose him. I honestly cannot watch her destroy her life any longer. Story 2. A previous friend dated a man who turned out to be a child molester. When we all discovered the truth, as he admitted to molesting an 8-year-old in writing, she told me and some other friends that she would rather help him escape the consequences of the law than continue her friendships with everyone in our friend group. She was a school teacher. I reported her to her school, but I don't know if anything ever came of it. We informed the authorities of her address when they came looking for him. To this day, it makes me feel sick to think about it. Story 3. She showed up at my house late and drunk, bringing a bag of random clothes and bathing suits. We went to our planned event, and she proceeded to belittle my other friends and get loud. Then she disappeared in a rideshare without saying a word. Her boyfriend harassed me via Messenger for a week about the bag she left at my house, accusing me of stealing it. I told him she was welcome to come get it, but that I wasn't going to drive it to her. She later reappeared and commented on all of my posts, also calling me a thief. I placed her bag next to the bin on trash day and told her she could come get it or risk it being taken. I have her on camera finally showing up to grab the bag, then kicking over the trash bin. I hope you're doing well, Celeste. Also, your ex-boyfriend messaged me a few weeks ago asking if I'd like to meet for a drink. I politely declined and blocked him. You're welcome. Story 4. She fell into a strange pseudo-intellectual rabbit hole and became quite arrogant and condescending, as if to say that others cannot comprehend her superior intellectual tastes. The last straw was when she casually mentioned her support for conversion therapy, which often involves torturous methods to cure queer individuals. That was when I realized we were no longer compatible, and we let our friendship fizzle out, which is unfortunate since we were really close friends for about 7 years. To this day, I have a knee-jerk reaction whenever I hear the name Jordan Peterson. Story 5. I needed to find peace, so difficult decisions had to be made. Later, I realized the decisions weren't actually that difficult. I am my own best friend now. Story 6. I had 3 friends in college. We went to bars together and loved to play home games like poker with each other during the weekdays. We enjoyed drinking, smoking, and having a good time. After a while, one of them went to study abroad. We visited him and had a great time at a casino and a strip club. It was awesome. He told us he was going to Los Angeles to study. We agreed that we would definitely visit him and go to Las Vegas. This was one of the bucket list things we discussed in college. Fast forward 8 months later, I was having a bite with 2 of these friends, not the one in Los Angeles. I found out they visited him 2 months ago in Vegas, all of them without me. When I asked why they didn't invite me, they responded that it was a bit hectic, and they had to buy tickets on the spot all of a sudden and forgot to reach out to me. That was the last time I spoke to them. I don't need friends like these. Story 7. Childhood best friend in 1993 needed to be bailed out of jail for not paying speeding tickets. I put up the money and didn't mention it to anyone. A week later, he told our friend group that I was hounding him for money, even though I had not said a word to him or anyone else. I decided to cut off communication with him. Over the years, we've had a few messages on Facebook that I have ignored. Taking my money and then slandering me would be the reason for my silence. Story 8. A lifelong best friend asked if my daughter still thought she was a lesbian. I asked her if she still liked being intimate with men she wasn't married to. I never saw or spoke to her again. Story 9. Immaturity. We were in our 30s, and she would act like a jealous teenager. Another friend was always chronically late. Story 10. I moved to another school but still kept in touch with them. By my next birthday, I realized that they had never reached out to me. It was always me reaching out to them. When I invited them over for the party, they seemed aloof and more interested in my video games than in me, which I tried to rationalize. I asked why they never called me, and all 3 said they forgot my phone number. I wrote it down and handed it to them, but each looked hesitant to accept it. That was when I knew that I wasn't their friend anymore. I was just a former classmate to them. After dinner, they went home, and I never saw any of them again. Story 11. Taking different paths. I lost a few friends after having kids. I am not going to continue going out to bars at this stage in my life. Story 12. I realized how much he wasn't actually my friend and was very jealous of me. He tried to sabotage my relationship with my now girlfriend, among other things that made me realize he was never truly in my corner. He just wanted me in his so he could keep an eye on me. Story 13. They gossiped about others constantly and made me feel uncomfortable, especially since they often picked on more nerdy or awkward people, which is the kind of person I truly am. There was one time when I went into full-body convulsions from alcohol poisoning while we were at someone's apartment, and no one called an ambulance. That was the final incident that made me lose all respect for them. Story 14. I have attention deficit disorder. I am impulsive, slow to think, and have scars from past experiences, along with a mood disorder. I have damaged all my friendships, and no one talks to me anymore. Story 15. He had become an alcoholic and not a good one. He would sometimes show up completely drunk and go straight to my bedroom, passing out in my bed. I enjoy partying, but this is not acceptable. He lied constantly. He pretended he still had a career as a consultant in politics, even though he had been fired long ago. Maybe that was why he was drinking. He always needed a favor and wanted to borrow money. We had not been friends for very long. I couldn't deal with his behavior. I guess political consultants are not much different from politicians with their drinking and lying. He could tell stories about all the Danish members of parliament with wine and whiskey bottles hidden in their bookshelves, but he didn't realize he was becoming a much worse drinker himself. Story 16. I became disabled. My stomach stopped functioning, and in trying to get nutrients, my doctor suggested baby food. I don't have children, so I asked a group of friends who do if they had any recommendations. I was snapped at and told that if I was that sick, I needed to be in the hospital with a feeding tube. I don't need that kind of negativity from someone when I'm trying to avoid that exact situation. Only one person out of 5 defended me during that conversation. That's the only one I still keep in touch with. I'm still not able to eat solid food most of the time, but I have better friends now who are understanding about my situation. Becoming disabled will definitely narrow your friend group. Story 17. When we realized she spent time with us because she was unemployed and bored, once she returned to work, she was never available. Story 18. They all became gossipers. They would talk about anyone the moment they turned their back. But that is not who I am. So I left them. Story 19. I had a friend ask me with complete sincerity, "Why don't we have White History Month?" I ended contact with that individual immediately. I hope he is unhappy. Story 20. For me, it's because they weren't headed in the same direction as I was and were trying to drag me back into drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and partying. If you want to improve your life, you need to consider who you surround yourself with first. Story 21. She was a manipulative, self-centered person. We had been friends since the early 2000s. I met her through another friend who is her cousin. She found God about 10 years ago because her boyfriend's parents said they were living in sin. He had been estranged from them and was trying to patch things up. So she realized that her support was disappearing. He worked while she lounged around the house all day. Hence, she became suddenly religious. A person who was a self-professed promiscuous individual claimed that religion was nonsense and listened to music like the Dead Kennedys. After she found God, she said my friends and I were heathens and were going to hell, and that she and her children could not associate with us. I was indifferent. A few years later, her boyfriend, now husband, had another falling out with his difficult parents and cut them off, leading to no more church and religious nonsense. Now, she wants to hang around again and go to the bars with us. I haven't spoken to her since. All my other friends continue to engage with her. She is also a major troublemaker and they always fall for it. My girlfriend and my best friend's wife never liked her, and they were right. Story 22. Almost 2 years ago, I went on holiday with a friend of mine abroad. I have been friends with him since middle school. People would always say he was full of himself, but I brushed it off. He would say things and I would always dismiss it as him just joking. It wasn't until I shared a room with him and spent several days together that I noticed his behavior. I usually only see him at the gym or during a night out. During the holiday, he became increasingly self-absorbed, constantly asking questions like, "Do I look good?" and "I am better than you." That's when I realized how self-centered he was after all these years of friendship. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I became blunt with him after returning, I began to reflect on some of the sly remarks and little digs he made. A friend should never want to compete with you, try to rub things in your face, or make you feel small. Nor should they embarrass you in front of people they have just met. Story 23. The constant little white lies to make herself seem cooler or whatever she was trying to do was one thing. Bailing on my wedding the day before and not speaking to me since was another. We're done. Story 24. One of them kept asking me for money. I told him twice never to ask again. Another person, when I asked for a simple favor, said okay but did not follow through. When I reminded her, she became very upset with me. I do not deal with people like that. Story 25. She kept cheating on her boyfriend, who was also my friend. She cheated on him publicly at parties in front of me repeatedly, even after I expressed my anger and frustration. I started to feel guilty and would cry myself to sleep over what to do. I couldn't eat or sleep because I knew how it felt, and I wish someone would have told me. After consoling many friends and family members, I decided to tell him the truth, including that she had been lying about her age for the past 8 months of knowing him. I was 19, she was 17, and he was 20. She told him she was 18, and I never mentioned it until this situation occurred. She was angry when she found out I told him and gave me the choice to either block him and we could remain friends or she would block me. I refused to block him because he was my friend and she wasn't a good person, so I blocked her in response. Though it hurt because she was my best friend, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't change my decision. Story 26. My friend of nearly 40 years, whom I met when I was 16, has changed due to politics over the last 12 years. I was okay with this as I believe everyone has the right to their beliefs. However, she considered herself an activist and used her Facebook page to post political articles without commentary. A couple of years ago, she shared an article that was so ridiculous that I asked her if she really believed it. Her political friends, who do not know me, immediately started replying with hurtful names. She responded with her general beliefs but did not answer my question. Later, she called me and yelled, which triggered an anxiety attack. I decided to end the friendship since I do not tolerate being yelled at. Story 27. I was friends with him, but occasionally I would hang out with him and his wife at the same time. She was very kind and good to him. However, he was unfaithful. A good-looking man whom women admired, he couldn't control himself. It always felt wrong that I knew this but was expected to remain silent around his wife. Eventually, she discovered the truth, and he denied it. He even asked me to be his alibi and lie to her. I didn't respond, but I knew I had to end our friendship. Story 28. Old friend. Good friend. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Never worked except for his father part-time. Grew up in a wealthy community on the coast. I, on the other hand, worked hard in a very difficult trade and was quite skilled at it. There was never enough time to complete all the work I needed to do to barely scrape by for 30 years. This friend was in my target market, and for several years I was happy to fulfill his orders at basically cost 1 or 2 a year. As I got older and times became tougher, I began to feel burnt out. I had 2 children, a wife, and a mortgage. He somehow became more demanding, still living in the house his parents had moved out of, with no bills and not really doing anything. He started complaining about the cost and turnaround time on his charity orders. I realized I had reached my limit. I had no respect left for him. I cut him off. Done. Story 29. She insisted that one of my 2 days off was our day. If I didn't call her that day to make plans every week, she would show up at my door and cry. One day, my husband and I were having some alone time, and when the knocking and crying stopped, she began calling my relatives to ask where I was and why I wasn't answering my door if I was home. Felt like stalking behavior. Story 30. I understand if I receive criticism for this. But because she is a supporter of Donald Trump, I felt physically sick even considering remaining her friend. I am incapable of speaking to her, knowing she supports someone with such extremist views. I strongly believe in the saying that if 9 people are sitting at a table and one person with extremist beliefs sits with them, and no one gets up, then there are 10 people with those beliefs at that table. She is no longer welcome at my table and never will be. Story 31. She always made things about herself, fished for negative aspects of my life, and seemed to think I was lying when I shared positive experiences. She was generally very unempathetic and more. The last straw was when she thought I flirted with an ex-boyfriend of hers, who was a childhood classmate of mine, that she dated for only 2 months when we were 16. All I did was talk about childhood memories with him. When I told her to stop making it about herself and creating drama when there was none, she became very angry and acted hurt. Honestly, I have been feeling much better without her in my life. Story 32. Many friendships fade as we get older. I don't think I have ever told someone, "I'm not your friend anymore." I know people who test their friends by actively avoiding them to see if they reach out, and when they don't, they decide they are no longer friends. However, they never communicate this, and it often seems like a way to cope with being ignored. The only friend I have actively avoided was imprisoned for murder, but we had stopped talking 10 years before his imprisonment. Story 33. She got drunk and sent me insulting emails, about 40 or 50. I didn't respond and just blocked her on everything. It's nice because I no longer have to listen to her constant tales of woe. Story 34. I call this taking personal inventory, and it is a necessary part of being a functional adult. Once I notice a pattern of taking without giving and an imbalance in effort, I reassess the friendship. This does not mean I cut people off. Usually, it means I need to readjust the effort I put into relationships that do not reciprocate in a reasonably comparable way. Sometimes I do have to cut people off. When I was a young adult, I distanced myself from people who were using drugs I did not want around me, as it sabotaged my efforts for a successful life. Other times, it was because of dishonesty. Once, I ended a relationship because someone was spiraling and could not take any accountability. Our energy is finite. I have learned to be careful about whom I spend it on. Story 35. One person was trying to share explicit photos of a girl he was involved with. I didn't want to see them and attempted to stop him from sending them to the rest of the group, which led to a debate. In the end, I was the one who was excluded because of my unpopular opinions. It became difficult to make friends, as they all eventually conflicted with my principles, so I chose to keep to myself from then on. Story 36. I have not cut off a friend of 40 years. However, as an experiment, I stopped reaching out to her to see if she would contact me. It has been 3 years. Story 37. For me, it was just the final straw after decades of being a bad friend, where all the effort flowed in one direction. I stopped initiating contact after that, and we never spoke again. Additionally, he was quite deceitful. With the benefit of hindsight, he found fault in everything that everyone did while believing himself to be perfect and a genius. He only liked people as much as they were useful to him. I may have extended an olive branch, but when mask mandates were implemented during COVID-19, he completely fell down the conspiracy rabbit hole, claiming that doctors and nurses were evil and lying to us. There was no possibility of coming back from that. Story 38. I had a friend I hung out with for years. He joined the Navy within a year of high school and went to Jacksonville. He found a strip club and quickly married a stripper. They had 2 children in just over 2 years. We were about 21 when all of this happened. He was deployed on a cruise, and they planned to sell the house when he returned. The stripper wife called his mother in New York and said she was bringing the kids up for a week to focus on preparing the house for sale. She drove from Jacksonville to New York, dropped the kids off, and left. The children were malnourished and dirty, covered in what we assumed were bedbug or flea bites. Both kids had to go to the hospital for antibiotics and treatment, as it appeared they received diaper changes only once a day, if they were lucky. Flash forward a few months. He returned from his deployment and was immediately arrested at the dock because his car was involved in a hit-and-run accident. The house was in foreclosure, and renters were looking for him because the bank had evicted them. His wife had rented the house and stopped paying the mortgage. She also opened several credit cards in both his and his mother's names and maxed them out immediately, having power of attorney. He came back to a complete mess. He got released from custody quickly when it became clear that he had been deployed and was not involved. Meanwhile, my girlfriend and I were in New York for 3 months, working full-time and trading the kids back and forth with his mother, who also worked full-time. When my buddy returned to New York, he was in a terrible state. I did what any good friend would do, helped out, listened, and tried my best to be there for him. About a year later, his wife reappeared on the radar after being arrested in his car with a load of meth in Kansas. He was sharing a car with his mother and borrowing anyone's vehicle when he needed one. The police in Kansas impounded his car. I paid to fly him to Kansas, and his grandmother paid to retrieve the car. He drove the car from Kansas to New York. The vehicle looked like it had been through a demolition derby and hadn't seen a mechanic in years. The interior was a disaster, with cat waste ground into the seats, and it reeked of cat urine from several feet away, even with the windows rolled up. The car was also infested with German cockroaches. We bug-bombed the car 3 times, stripped out the entire interior, including the headliner, trunk, and carpet. We cleaned the seats and pressure-washed the carpets, then bug-bombed it again once everything was removed. I ultimately spent $2,000 and 3 full weekends on that car. This sort of worked. Flash forward 3 years. My friend never recovered from the ordeal. His behavior became increasingly erratic and angry over time, and he frequently detailed various ways he would slowly harm his ex-wife while playing the victim, making numerous statements about people hurting his children. No amount of advice or attempts to help him was effective. This obsession ruled his life, making normal conversations impossible. I was not the only one affected. Other friends began distancing themselves much sooner than I did. During those 3 years, he was transferred from Jacksonville to Norfolk and continued to make poor choices regarding strippers, ruining his life a second time before ultimately receiving a dishonorable discharge. In the last year, I started to distance myself further. He moved back to New York with his children, had no job, and was essentially unemployable due to his discharge. He would show up at my workplace whenever he pleased, wanting to hang out and chat. This caused me trouble more than once, including getting written up when he wandered around the shop with his kids while I was at lunch. Despite me repeatedly telling him he couldn't show up while I was working as a mechanic in a dealership, I eventually changed jobs without informing him, stopped taking his phone calls, and began hanging out in different places or not going out at all. There's more to the story, but it's already lengthy without getting into every detail. In the end, I grew tired of trying to avoid him and ultimately blocked all forms of contact about 3 months before moving. Story 39. I stopped drinking on New Year's. A friend of mine, whom I've known for over a decade, was having some financial trouble. She works at a cultivation facility for a dispensary and asked if I could help her sell some products to make ends meet. This was about 2 weeks before I stopped drinking, and our original plan was to go to a bar I used to frequent and try to offload some items. She didn't pursue this until after I stopped drinking and contacted me about a week after New Year's, asking me to meet her that night to sell them. I explained that I was recently sober and, though I had agreed to help a few weeks ago, I was no longer comfortable hanging out in a bar. She basically told me to suck it up and help her. There was no support, no understanding, and no effort to find an alternative. She wanted me to drop everything right then and there and assist her. She had promised her daughter a birthday celebration that she couldn't afford and tried to make me feel guilty about it. It's not my fault that you lied to your child and managed your finances irresponsibly. I tried to be a good friend, you waited weeks to address it, and now suddenly it's urgent and I owe you something. I'm not going to do that. I haven't spoken to her since, and I'm still sober. Story 40. Politics. I lost 2 lifelong friends and my best friend due to support for the current administration. Story 41. I was getting married to another woman, my now ex-wife, and my high school group was becoming more religious and increasingly homophobic. One member married a very homophobic man, and they defended him when he refused to shake my hand or invite me to the wedding. As a result, I cut them off completely. Story 42. Close friend group. One member was going through an immense amount of difficulties. We kept in touch through a group text because we were all spread out and we shared everything. Or so we thought. This friend was being constantly harassed by her neighbors, who were shooting out her car windows, shining lights into her windows at night, and calling code enforcement. This harassment eventually led to her husband, and their child leaving their home due to the constant filming and disturbances. Then this friend experienced a transient ischemic attack. Following that, she had another one. Her husband began using her weakened state to control her. One night, he called the police, claiming she was on drugs. When they arrived, she couldn't form words to explain that she was having a stroke. Her 6-year-old finally spoke up and said, "Mommy's brain is sick," and the officers figured it out and called an ambulance. We organized to get her out of there. I offered to take care of her cats and dog as long as needed. Another friend drove 4 hours to assist her and gather her belongings, and another friend provided her with a place to stay. We all came together to ensure she and her daughter had somewhere to go and everything they needed. However, her daughter turned out to be quite a handful. She destroyed one room in the house where they were staying. Our friend was not the best houseguest. We tried to attribute her behavior to the transient ischemic attacks and stroke. We attempted to give her the benefit of the doubt, but over time, we all started to have doubts about her stories and her overall character. Eventually, we compared notes and discovered she had been spreading many fabrications among us. Everything turned out to be a lie. She was having an affair with her boss and flaunting it in his wife's face on social media, which led to her husband finding out. There was no abuse, but he was understandably upset. In the end, they are now divorced, he has custody, and she is married to her boss, running a dog rescue out of her apartment. Why does she have an apartment? Because her boss husband got her one. Turns out he can't stand living with her and can't afford another divorce. Story 43. The most brutal experience was with my best friend from ages 17 to 20. He promised he would pay me a significant debt once he was paid while I was halfway through my first holiday with friends. He didn't pay me anything, and my brother saw him at the bookmakers the same day. I spent the last 3 days of my first holiday alone in my hotel, which gave me plenty of time to evaluate my relationships. Story 44. She was always a bit sarcastic with me, surprised rather than happy when I got a job promotion. It seems she thought she was the only one who had grown up since high school. The final straw was when we had coffee, and I mentioned bumping into my emotionally and financially abusive ex. I commented on how unpleasant it had been to see him, and she just responded, "Well, I never knew him that well, so I only have your word for it that he wasn't nice to you." That was when I realized she never had my back. She couldn't even take my side over some man that, in her own words, she never knew well. I couldn't be bothered with her after that. Story 45. Drugs are a serious issue. Most of my old high school friends are addicts. One is a homeless meth user. Another is married to someone in jail and takes pills all day. And another has never had a job in his life, living off his mother while using meth. The worst is my old middle school best friend. She became addicted to pills, and about a year and a half ago, she fatally attacked her roommate with a sharp object. She is currently in jail on first-degree murder charges. The trial hasn't happened yet, but her life is changed forever. Don't use drugs, as they will ruin your life. Story 46. He attacked me physically in my own home. I pushed him through a wall. I am 5 feet 3 inches tall, while he is 6 feet 7 inches and weighs over twice my weight. Story 47. I decided to wait for them to reach out and keep in touch. 25 years later, they only contacted me once about 5 years ago to say they were thinking of me. I did not reply. Story 48. Years ago, a friend shared how her family kept their sister from her partner while she was dying in the hospital. The sister was gay, and they believed that homosexuality was a sin. I told my friend that her family was wrong, and I never spoke to her again. Story 49. He wrote me a letter saying that my wife and I do not respect him or his girlfriend and that we act like we are his parents. He stated that he doesn't want me to be his best man at his wedding if we do not support his love and do not like her. I have done everything I can to support and help them, even trying to build a bond with his girlfriend. He once told me that she was ugly when they first met and naively advised me to disregard people's opinions and listen to his heart. What a mistake that was. From not even talking to us and being on her phone the first time we met, to him only throwing parties with her friends and excluding us, it feels like a complete waste of 15 years of friendship. I listened to him complain about her and express that she makes him mad, as if he were going to hit her. I tried to help him calm down, assuring him it was okay and offering tips to de-escalate the situation. I have grown frustrated and blocked them from everything I can. It will soon be 3 years. Story 50. I had to quit smoking marijuana not only for my mental health but also for my physical health. I was underweight and very depressed, so I couldn't be around anything related to marijuana anymore. My friends and I used to smoke it every day. Story 51. The friend group was formed because we were outsiders at the school. We didn't like each other at first. We just hung out because why not? But then A and M started dating. I began to like JY, but he liked F, so I helped them get together. Then I started to like JX, who was dating L, but I started cheating on M, and then M came to me for advice, leading to their breakup. During the summer, JX confessed to me, but I was still in denial about my sexuality, so I said no. After that, JX started talking to A, who began dating M again. Now, this school year, M stopped talking to all of us and broke up with A. JY moved away and broke up with F, who is now my best friend, and cut off contact with all of us. I stopped talking to A, who was my former best friend, and continued talking to JX for a while before we got into a big argument because I felt like he was leading me on and he was confused. Then we stopped talking and haven't communicated since, although we left it on a good note. To sum it all up, we all cut each other off because we were too toxic. Story 52. She was deep in addiction to multiple substances. Her behaviors and actions were not acceptable and often hurtful to myself and others. It was a toxic friendship. I wish it could have ended differently, but it was necessary for it to happen. Thankfully, she is now sober and in a better place. We are not in contact and we probably never will be. Story 53. She was dating my boyfriend behind my back, and she knew he was my boyfriend. My mom still tries to get me to reconnect because she was my best friend until that betrayal. Story 54. I have cut off friends for being consistently mean and verbally abusive, including my sister. I tolerated their behavior for years before I reached my limit. Story 55. He was using me for money and rides. The day I figured it out and the week or so after, he showed his true colors and they were ugly. I found out when he slipped up and revealed his greed. Story 56. She made me the villain even though I tried to help her with my best abilities to support her through her depression. She went through an identity crisis and felt more like a man. I supported her to the point where, after I got together with my boyfriend, I made sure to see her more than him. She was genuinely happy for me, which in hindsight was not true. She wanted to make me the problem and told me to do inappropriate things. Well, Selena, I have been with my boyfriend for 7 years, so I feel like I won by cutting you out of my life. Thank you very much. Because of you, I realized that my time is valuable and should not be wasted on toxic people like you. Story 57. I have a friend from childhood who made terrible relationship decisions repeatedly. He would come to me to pick up the pieces but never took the advice of his friends. When things inevitably went bad, we had to pick up the pieces once more. It became exhausting after decades, so I decided to step away. Story 58. I had a friend who wanted too much. She wouldn't go to the store unless I accompanied her. She gave me her credit cards and asked me to help her set up payments and to prevent her from overspending. She couldn't make any decisions without my assistance. I felt like she was too dependent on me. I wanted a friend, not a child. As a mother, I valued my time away from my kids to relax. On top of that, she knew 2 of my pet peeves were baby talk and being physically poked. She did both just to annoy me, and that was honestly the last straw. Story 59. Narcissistic. Owes my dad money. Constantly involved in my relationships. Refused to believe his girlfriend at the time was unfaithful. Left me waiting at a bar with promises of being there in 15 minutes but never showed. Constantly lied about his grades in college, stating he was going to be a nuclear physicist. He is a non-degree teacher who coaches middle school football. I eventually got my revenge, and his life isn't as great as he made it out to be. Story 60. She started to treat me like her therapist. I had to drop everything to listen to her problems. I noticed we didn't do anything together. She went on vacations, dinners, and parties with others but excluded me. She only called when she needed life advice or wanted to vent. I mentioned this a few times over the last 3 years of our friendship, but it was brushed aside. She didn't care or invest in my life and had no idea what I was going through. So I cut her out. Story 61. She called me and said her husband, whom I had never met, wanted to talk to me. It was strange, but I agreed to speak with him. When he got on the line, it turned out he was some sort of preacher wanting to give me an opportunity to help spread the gospel. As I rolled my eyes, he said, "To be honest, I don't know if I could work with you. I'm willing to give you a chance." I replied, "Let me help you with that. There's no way I will ever work with you. Please put Donna back on the line." When she returned to the phone, I told her never to call me again. And she hasn't. That was 20 years ago. I have rarely been as angry as I was listening to that preacher ramble on. What a nasty, misogynistic person. Story 62. She became upset with me after 2 years of friendship in high school because I wouldn't sit in her uncomfortable desk chair and watch Justin Bieber videos for longer than the hour I had already been there. She didn't talk to me for a couple of days, so I ended it right there. Not long after that, I heard she got a life-size cardboard cutout of both him and Taylor Swift. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.